One.
Morning, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Topical Talkology. And today we're going to talk about abuse of power.
Good morning, Andy. How are you?
I'm all right, Theo. Well, good to
On
see
a
you
nice
again this week.
Sunday morning,
It
slightly
is.
less sweltering than yesterday.
Oh, it's all right. I quite like this weather. We may as well enjoy it while we can. But last week we were talking about victim mentality, and today we're really going to talk about the flip side of the coin, actually, which is about abuse of power in some ways, and how interconnected they actually are. So, actually, Theo, let me pose this question: what is abuse of power, and how does it come about?
Well, it depends how you define it. That's the first thing. Now, if you think about, if we go back to animals, and you see how their little groups function, the way they function is purely through power. In other words, it's always the rule of the biggest, the strongest, the fastest, and the meanest. Pure power. And the idea there is that it's a zero-sum game. In other words, there is only a certain amount in the system. It's a bit like when you trade on the financial markets. There's a fixed amount on the table, and you either win it or you lose it. And what you lose is someone else's gain. Now, in the animal kingdom, the resource of survival, your gain is someone else's loss, and therefore you can only gain it through power.
Well, actually, it's, we've talked about this in the past, and there's, I'd probably suggest you Google it or YouTube it, because it's actually really interesting. It's about the bonobo monkeys, and over a certain period of time, the two groups, which were almost identical in terms of where they came from, in terms of the DNA, in terms of genetics, were separated by the river. On one side, it was a fight for survival, where it was all about power, and it was about the strongest, and it was very much about aggression and things like that. On the other side, it was all about the bonobo monkeys were shagging each other. They were all very gender fluid in that respect. There was a harmony amongst them, and the one difference that I think they found was that on one side there was a scarcity of food, and on the other side there was an abundance of food.
And you see, that's the zero-sum game, because where there was an abundance of food, then because there was oversupply, then one person's gain was not another person's loss, because there was simply an overabundance. On the other side of the river, where there was a scarcity of resource, then one person's gain was definitely another person's loss, which is why they had to be aggressive and exert power.
And the thing is, because it was very much the alpha chimp, I suppose, or the alpha monkey, was in effect actually was the one who actually had sexual relations with all the females, and that's how he actually used his power to maintain that position.
That's right. But you see, here's the other thing, that if you think purely about that power model, purely that model is inefficient. For instance, if you have two males tearing each other apart for a resource, all you have to do is to have a third male watch it until they've almost finished each other off, and the third male just steps in and does away with the survivor. So what there is within power there is hierarchy. And hierarchy is fundamental. We are, all of us, all of the time, constantly assessing our position in hierarchy. And the hierarchy is based on serotonin levels. So the lower you are in a hierarchy, the lower your serotonin level. The higher you are in the hierarchy, the higher your serotonin level. Now, the higher you are in the hierarchy and the higher your serotonin level, the more you take. for yourself, and the less subservient you are. The lower your serotonin level, the less you take for yourself, and the more subservient you are. So therefore, even in the animal kingdom, where you have more than two animals around at the same time, you have a structure of power and hierarchy functioning.
Well,
very important to get.
I mean,
that.
I wrote an article, many years ago actually, when I was talking about power and the use of power, and actually, nearly every kind of power is actually temporary. Now, you want to talk about the animal kingdom. The power is only temporary while the alpha has actually got the physical strength to be able to maintain it. So once he becomes old and less mobile, someone will always challenge his position. Now, there are several types of power. There's power of position, which that could be considered one of that. For example, a CEO, someone ahead of you in a company, only has power while you're in that position now where he actually has the power to be able to control you. Once you've actually separate yourself from that, he no longer has the power, or he or she no longer has the power.
No, see, that's different. So
we're talking about the different categories of power here.
Well, not yes and no.
But it's only temporary. Because the CEO will not be in that position forever. If you want to call him a CEO, someone in a higher position, a higher management position in an organisation, whether it's a state leader, for example, only actually has that power over you while they actually hold that position, while they actually hold that title. Now, you look at Boris Johnson right now. He actually has power to dictate how we are to behave ourselves during this COVID pandemic or lockdown and whatever rules he's implementing in place. Whether he's actually being a good leader about it or not is irrelevant. But he actually has the power to actually make those decisions on whether we should wear masks in shops, whether we should go on a bus with a mask, well, whatever the reason. But that position is only temporary. His position is only there until his next point of re-election.
Yes, so we need to be very specific about our definitions. So in the animal kingdom, of course, you're right. The person will be challenged, and that's okay because clearly you always want the best genes with the most access to the most mates. So obviously, if someone stronger comes along with genes that make you stronger, then that animal is going to depose the current leader of the tribe and then have access to all the females again. Now, the point is, in human society is not based on power. Human society is based on competence. For instance, you don't want the most powerful doctor looking after you. You want the most competent doctor looking after you. You don't want the most powerful solicitor advising you. You want the most competent solicitor advising you. So it is competence, and which is important. And therefore, what we do is we rate people now in a hierarchy of competence. And those people we then give authority to. And then it depends on how they use their authority as to how they abuse the power.
Look, I think... I mentioned one type of power, which is power of position. Now, there's several types of power. And we were actually having a chat earlier this morning when we talked about having a certain level of connections and associates is a position of power. It has power as well. So people you can call on. So the mafia, for example, during the 1970s, probably early 1980s, had a level of power because they had a number of associates and people, they called it the commission or whatever, that actually gave them a level of power which they were then able to abuse to actually be able to install fear into the people they were actually targeting.
Oh, we see that.
Now, hold on. So that's another type of power.
No, but that's based on the combination of competence and
Connections.
fear and
Connections.
power.
Now, there's the power of information. Now, you have information that nobody else has and they need. That is another form of power.
Competence.
However,
Information.
this is all temporary. I'm saying these are all forms of temporary power, because once that information becomes public, and we are in the information revolution right now, where everybody has access to God knows an immense amount of information. Once it's out there, you no longer have that power. Now, when you talk about competence, we talk about power of expertise. That's another form of power. But that expertise is only valid until someone else comes along with a higher level of expertise or some level of innovation that comes along that changes that. So a top-level lawyer 20 years ago will not necessarily have the same power today as whether it's the economic shift or if you go to the pest analysis, the political, economical, social and technical factors can necessarily change all that. So all these powers are temporary. The only real power someone has is actually an authentic power that people actually gravitate towards them because of actually who they are and how they behave. So as soon as you start abusing that, you lose your power in effect. Like Harvey Weinstein. He had a level of power to a degree when he was actually running the whole of Hollywood. Until he lost that position, it was temporary. Now look where he is. Now, you could probably say, no, I want to go down the political, the religious route, but you actually want to look at an iconic figure who literally who could be described as an authentic power, who never did anything for his own personal gain or never abused his position, would be someone like Jesus Christ. He was gravitated to him because he was influenced.
How do you describe tyranny?
Well, tyranny is an abuse of power. Now,
that's it.
But the thing is, that will only last. That can again. I'll also consider that temporary, because if you look at Saddam Hussein, Colonel Gaddafi. Now, they behaved in a tyrannical manner, but guess what? At some point, they were overthrown.
Well, so
because of their behaviour.
So that we can focus and clarify, then we need to talk about snapshots versus systems functioning. So a snapshot within a system is in modern human society is based on hierarchical competence. So in other words, and that's what we value, and quite rightly so. For instance, but we should be very specific here. Hierarchical competence is essential because otherwise you can't excel in any particular field. And of course, Marxism does away with hierarchical competence because it's about the same outcome for everyone.
Well, is it?
Well, that's the point. Marxism is about having the same outcome from everyone, because if someone has a bit more than you, then they must be deposed very rapidly.
But that is an abuse of power.
What? Deposing people
Marxism
rapidly?
is an abuse of power. So, because the thing is, you're controlling people and how they live their lives. Now, if someone chooses to work 80 hours a week and earns a lot more money and he chooses to save it, and the other person will turn around and say, actually, he's got more than I have, they could even put it down to privilege.
Okay, but that's not...
Guess what happens?
Okay, but that's
if the government chooses to take the money away from them, all right, that is actually theft.
Okay, but the point is
it not?
That's not abuse of power. That's just the system as it is being abusive.
It's not
a healthy system.
But it's made by a controlled state who actually hold the hierarchical position anyway, because they're not the same as anybody else.
Yeah, but no. The point here is that it's how people abuse their position, and the point about Marxism is that it is abusive. It's not a healthy system which is open to abuse. Okay, it's an abusive system, full stop, and it is catastrophic. But we're talking about how human society functions, which is hierarchical competence, which we then give the privilege of authority to, and that's how we function. And that system will not function if it's abused.